In today's video, we're going to learn about one of the major characteristics of living things, and that is reproduction. This video has been divided into all the important sections, so you can check the description box to skip to any section you'd like. So what exactly is reproduction? Reproduction is the process by which living organisms create new individuals of their kind. It is essential for the continuity of life. So, animals having babies, plants producing seeds, and unicellular organisms like bacteria dividing are all examples of reproduction. If for any reason plants, animals, or even bacteria stopped reproducing, life as we know it would come to a halt. So there are two types of reproduction: asexual reproduction and sexual reproduction. So let's break down each, starting with the simpler, faster route, which is asexual reproduction. In asexual reproduction, offsprings are produced from a single parent without the fusion of gametes. So essentially, all the offsprings are clones. That means they are exact genetic copies of the parents. It is efficient, quick, and common in simpler organisms, including some plants and bacteria. Now, although asexual reproduction is simple and fast, it is not universal. So, the type of asexual reproduction that works for one organism may not work for another organism. That means there has to be more than one type of asexual reproduction. So, what are the types of asexual reproduction? We have binary fission, budding, spore formation, and vegetative reproduction. So, binary fission. Binary fission is a process of asexual reproduction in unicellular organisms in which a single cell, that is the parent, divides into two equal parts by mitosis to produce two new daughter cells. Take bacteria, for example. They reproduce by binary fission. They split into two identical cells. Even amoebas do this too. So next, budding. Some organisms like yeast and even tiny animals like Hydra reproduce through budding. Here, a new organism grows as a bud on the parent and then separates to live independently. Imagine a mini me sprouting off the side and then heading off on its own. Scary, right? Next, spore formation. Spores are asexual reproductive units formed by lower organisms, especially in fungi. So let's look at an example. Rhizopus is an organism that reproduces with spore formation. So a rhizopus produces numerous spores in its sporangia. When the sporangia becomes mature, they burst and the spores are dispersed by the wind. If a spore falls on a suitable substance, it germinates and gives rise to new mycelium. So, vegetative reproduction. Vegetative reproduction is a form of asexual reproduction in which new plants grow from vegetative parts of the parent plant, such as roots, stems, and leaves. The offsprings are genetically identical to the parents. There are two types of vegetative reproduction, and they are natural and artificial vegetative reproduction. When it's natural, this occurs without human intervention and it involves the following plant parts. It involves modified stems, modified roots, and leaves. So, under modified stems, we have runners, and runners are horizontal stems that grow above the ground. Examples can be found in strawberry and spider plants. Next, we have rhizomes, and rhizomes are underground horizontal stems. Examples include ginger and canna lily. Next, we have tubers. Tubers are swollen underground stems that store nutrients. Examples include potatoes and yam. We have bulbs. These are underground stems with fleshy leaves for storage. Examples are onions and garlic. Then finally, we have corms. They are short, thickened underground stems. Examples include cocoyam and gladiolus. Next, modified roots. Under modified roots, we have storage roots. Some plants use thickened roots for vegetative propagation. Examples include sweet potato and dahlia. And finally, leaves. Some plants can grow new individuals from their leaves. An example includes bryophyllum. Artificial vegetative reproduction involves the intervention of humans to propagate plants. Examples include cutting, budding, grafting, layering, and macro-cutting. In cutting, a piece of stem, root, or leaf is cut and planted to grow into a new plant. The cut portions are called cuttings. Plants whose stem produce roots readily are propagated by stem cuttings. So examples of plants that can be propagated by cutting include rose, hibiscus, and cassava. Budding. Here, a bud from one plant is inserted into the bark of another plant. You can find this example in rose, apple, and rubber plants. Grafting. Grafting is closely related to budding, and it is a method of artificial vegetative propagation which involves the application of a whole stem or shoot, which is called the scion, into another plant, which is called the stalk. Both the scion and the stalk must be closely related to avoid incompatibilities. Types of grafting include cleft grafting, saddle grafting, and side and rib grafting. Layering. In layering, a branch is bent to the ground and covered with soil. Roots then form at the nodes. These roots are called adventitious roots. When the roots are well established, the stem is severed from the parent plant and transplanted to the field to become a new plant. This can be found in tomato, cocoa, and strawberry. Macro cutting. In macro cutting, a ring of bark is removed and the exposed area is wrapped in soil to encourage root growth. This branch can then grow into a new plant. Examples can be found in mango and guava. So, now that I've talked about asexual reproduction, let's talk about sexual reproduction. This one is a bit more complex because it involves two parents and the fusion of specialized reproductive cells called gametes. For plants, that might mean pollen and ovules, while in animals, it's sperms and eggs. In sexual reproduction, when two gametes fuse together, they form a zygote. Once the zygote is formed, it begins dividing through mitosis. In mammals, the zygote implants in the uterus where it grows into an embryo and eventually into a fetus. In egg-laying animals, the zygote develops inside the egg. In plants, after fertilization, the ovule develops into a seed and the surrounding ovary transforms into a fruit. These seeds can then grow into new plants under the right conditions. But here's the cool part. Because each parent contributes DNA, the offsprings in sexual reproduction are genetically unique. So instead of having identical clones, each new organism has a mix of both parent traits. This mixing of gene is called genetic variation. Now, there are two major types of sexual reproduction. We have Syngamy, which is a fusion of gametes, and then we have conjugation. Syngamy refers to the fusion of male and female gametes to form a zygote. The process can happen in two ways, either by external fertilization or internal fertilization. In external fertilization, gametes fuse outside the body of the organism. This is common in aquatic organisms like fish, frogs, and corals. The sperm and eggs are released into the water where fertilization occurs. External fertilization usually produces a large number of offspring and it doesn't require complex reproductive structures. And because this happens on the outside, there is a high chance of gametes being lost or eaten. The offsprings are vulnerable to predators and environmental conditions. In internal fertilization, gametes fuse inside the body of the organism. This can be seen in mammals, birds, reptiles, and some plants, flowering plants. In flowering plants, sexual reproduction is called pollination, and it is the transfer of pollen, which is the male gamete, from the anther of a plant to the stigma of the same plant or of a different flower. There are two types of pollination. We have self-pollination, which is when pollen from the same flower fertilizes the ovule, and we have cross-pollination, which is when pollen from one flower fertilizes the ovule of another flower. And this cross-pollination leads to a greater genetic diversity. Because internal fertilization occurs on the inside of the organisms, the gametes are protected from environmental hazards, and this increases the likelihood of survival of the organisms. Because the process is quite long and complex, it produces fewer offspring and requires more energy and specialized reproductive structures. Conjugation. Conjugation is a simpler form of sexual reproduction observed in unicellular organisms. It involves the transfer of genetic material from one organism to the other through a connecting structure. So we can find examples in bacteria, in protozoans, and in fungi. Bacteria use a pilot, which is a bridge-like structure, to transfer genetic material. Protozoans undergo conjugation by exchanging nuclear material, and in fungi like Spirogyra and Rhizopus, they perform conjugation by forming a conjugation tube. Conjugation allows for genetic recombination without producing gametes, and it also increases genetic diversity. Let's compare asexual and sexual reproduction. In asexual reproduction, only one parent is needed, no gametes are involved, offsprings are clones, and reproduction is faster and efficient. However, there is no genetic diversity. In sexual reproduction, it involves two parents, it requires gametes, it leads to genetic diversity, but it is generally slower and requires more energy. So if you found this video helpful, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share to your friends.